Before we get into this, and trust me, you're going to want to stay for every second of it. If you're a Patriots fan, or just an NFL fan in general, I've got links to some awesome Amazon team gear and fan products down in the description box. Go check those out. Now, let's talk about the biggest media story of 2026 so far, because as of this afternoon, it is officially over. And the ending? Nobody saw it coming this fast. If you're new here, let me get you up to speed in 60 seconds flat. Last Tuesday, April 7th, Page 6 published photos of New England Patriots head coach Mike Vrabel and the Athletics' senior NFL insider Dianna Russini at the Ambiente Resort in Sedona, Arizona. These are two married people. In the photos, they're in a hot tub together. They're holding hands on a rooftop. They're hugging and dancing. Both of them came out immediately and said, "This was completely innocent. There were 6 people in that group. The photos are misleading." The Athletic backed Russini up right away. Executive editor Steven Ginsberg told Page 6 she was a premier journalist and the photos lacked essential context. Then 3 eyewitnesses publicly contradicted that story. A hotel timeline surfaced showing they worked the same property for 4 straight days. And the official defense started falling apart fast. That's where we were going into this past weekend. Everything since then is what I'm about to walk you through right now. On Friday, Front Office Sports reported that The Athletic was actively probing Russini's explanation of the photos. Sources told them that the outlet had been pressing for proof that there were actually 6 people present, and that in the days since the story broke, not a single piece of public evidence had emerged to support it. That was a leak. But by Saturday, it went official. ESPN confirmed with its own sourcing that The Athletic was reinvestigating Russini's coverage and the nature of her relationship with Vrabel. And then the New York Times, Russini's own parent company, publicly confirmed the investigation on the record. Let me read you exactly what they said, because the specific language matters. Per the New York Times' own confirmation, both the nature of Russini's relationship with Mike Vrabel and her coverage of him were under review. And then they added, she will not be reporting while this investigation is underway. That's not a leave of absence. That's not stepping back to focus on herself. That is her own employer publicly pulling their biggest NFL voice off the beat during the single most important week of the entire NFL offseason, the week leading up to the 2026 NFL Draft. And here's the part that I personally think is the most devastating piece of this whole thing. The New York Times cited The Athletic's specific editorial guidelines in their public statement. Those guidelines require that journalists avoid, and I'm quoting directly, any activities that pose a conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict, so as to not call into question their credibility. The appearance of a conflict, that's the exact rule they cited. You don't cite that rule publicly unless you believe it applies. You don't pull a top-paid star reporter off the job unless you've seen something that tells you protecting her is a bigger reputational risk than sidelining her. In one sentence, the New York Times publicly admitted that an apparent conflict of interest between Dianna Russini and Mike Vrabel potentially exists. Compare that to where we were on Tuesday of last week, when that same executive editor was telling Page 6 the photos were misleading and praising Russini's journalism. That's a complete institutional reversal in 96 hours. And in media, 96 hours is a lifetime. That was Saturday. Then the byline disappeared. And then this past Tuesday, April 14th, exactly 1 week to the day after Page 6 published those photos, the investigation got its answer. Dianna Russini posted on Twitter that she had submitted her letter of resignation to Steven Ginsberg, effective immediately. Then she posted the full letter publicly herself. Front Office Sports broke it within minutes. As of Tuesday afternoon, the senior NFL insider for The Athletic, one of the highest-paid reporters at the entire New York Times company, is no longer employed. Now, I want to walk through the key parts of this resignation letter, because the language she chose is doing a lot of work, and I want to make sure you hear it in her own words so you can decide what you think. She opens by writing, I have covered the NFL with professionalism and dedication throughout my career, and I stand behind every story I have ever published. Notice what she's doing there. She's publicly defending her reporting record, specifically including recent coverage, at the same moment she's walking out the door. That's deliberate. Then she writes that after the Page 6 story broke, The Athletic supported her unequivocally and expressed confidence in her work, and she's grateful for that. But then she pivots. She says, In the days that followed, commentators across various media have engaged in self-feeding speculation that is simply unmoored from the facts. Moreover, this media frenzy is hurtling forward without regard for the review process The Athletic is trying to complete. So she's putting the blame squarely on media commentators. I'll let you guys decide in the comments whether that framing holds up given what we know. The witnesses, the timeline, the byline disappearance. All of that came from public record, not speculation. And then the closer. She writes, "Rather than allowing this to continue, I have decided to step aside now, before my current contract expires on June 30th. I do so not because I accept the narrative that has been constructed around this episode, but because I refuse to lend it further oxygen or to let it define me or my career." Two things to note here. 1. Her contract was already expiring June 30th. She's not leaving years of guaranteed money on the table. She's walking away from roughly 10 weeks of a deal that was already ending. 2. She's explicitly saying she's leaving on her terms and she doesn't accept the narrative. That's her framing. I did nothing wrong. The media made this impossible. I'm choosing to leave. You can decide what you make of that. Now here's where this story gets genuinely uncomfortable, because right now, in April 2026, the two people at the center of this story are in completely different places. Dianna Russini just lost her job. Mike Vrabel is still the head coach of the New England Patriots. Same photos, same resort, same weekend, same allegations. Two entirely different outcomes. On one side, a reporter whose own employer publicly sidelined her cited the specific editorial rule about conflicts of interest and pulled her off the beat during draft week. On the other side, a head coach whose organization confirmed they are not investigating him at all, and in fact, tried to claim he was never expected at the pre-draft press conference, even though he attended that exact same press conference last year. One of these people is now unemployed and defending her career on Twitter. The other one will be standing on a podium at the NFL draft in 2 weeks, holding up a jersey with his team's first-round pick on it. The only difference between them is that one works in football and the other worked in journalism. And right now in 2026, those two industries protect their own in very different ways. Here's the piece of this story that almost nobody has covered correctly, and I think it's actually one of the most important layers. Before Page 6 ever published these photos, they were shopped around to multiple outlets. One of those outlets was TMZ. And TMZ, the same TMZ that exists specifically to publish this kind of content, whose entire business model is celebrity caught on camera, passed on these photos. They didn't pass immediately. They deliberated. They genuinely went back and forth before saying no. That's a meaningful distinction. Because when the outlet that never says no to this kind of content actually hesitates, that tells you something about how the photos read to people who do this for a living. Now here's the bigger context. Page 6 is a vertical inside the New York Post. The New York Post is owned by the Murdochs. The Murdochs News Corp has been in a decade-long rivalry with the New York Times. The Athletic is owned by the New York Times. Dianna Russini was among the highest-paid reporters at that entire company. I'm not telling you it was a coordinated hit, I have no evidence of that, but I am telling you that a Murdoch-owned tabloid published photos that ended the career of a top-paid New York Times employee, after another tabloid passed on those same photos. The media war between the Murdoch empire and the New York Times just had a very visible skirmish, and Dianna Russini's career was the casualty. Somebody shopped those photos, somebody decided they were worth selling. We still don't know who took them or why, and that's part 4.